Beneath the surface of love and loyalty, a storm of jealousy and rage has erupted, shattering lives in an instant. Nicole's world exploded the moment she discovered Ted and Shanice together, unleashing a fury she could no longer contain. What began as suspicion spiraled into violence, leaving Shanice injured and every relationship teetering on the edge of destruction. In the blink of an eye, trust turned to betrayal, passion to peril, and a single secret threatened to ignite a chain reaction no one could escape. Now the question is no longer who is at fault, but who will survive the aftermath. Nicole felt her chest constrict in a way that was almost painful, a tightness that grew with every heartbeat as she caught sight of Ted and Shanice standing together across the room. The world seemed to slow, each movement of their bodies magnified, every glance shared between them carved into her mind with painful clarity. Her thoughts raced uncontrollably, a tangle of jealousy, anger, and fear, each emotion feeding the next until reason itself was suffocated. She had known jealousy before, the small, gnawing resentments that arose when someone else seemed closer to what she desired, but this was an inferno consuming every rational thought she once had. She saw the way Ted's hand brushed against Shanice's, the casual intimacy in the way they leaned toward each other, the way Shanice's laughter hung in the air, soft but provocative, like a siren song designed to punish her for her perceived failures. Nicole's mind tried to rationalize, to tell herself that she was overreacting, that perhaps what she saw wasn't what it appeared to be, that the shadows of her own insecurities were exaggerating a harmless moment. But logic was drowned beneath a tidal wave of emotion. Every betrayal she had feared, every imagined slight, every subtle insecurity she'd carried for years suddenly seemed confirmed in that single scene. The anger rose first as a tight coil in her stomach and chest, an almost physical force that demanded release. It wasn't just jealousy, it was rage, a rage that felt righteous, a vindictive justice for the humiliation she imagined she had endured silently for so long. Her body tensed, muscles quivering with readiness, and in that tension, all hesitation vanished. Her eyes locked onto Shanice, and the world beyond the two of them disappeared. There were no consequences, no potential regrets, only the singular, blinding need to act. As Nicole moved, it was like a storm had taken control of her body. Every step was fueled by fury, every motion sharpened by years of suppressed emotion, every breath a drumbeat in the escalating chaos within. She lunged toward Shanice, the speed of her movement making her seem almost inhuman, a vessel of pure, unchecked emotion. Shanice's eyes widened at the sudden attack, and for a heartbeat, time seemed suspended. Nicole's hand found its target, and the impact of the strike sent Shanice staggering, crashing into the edge of a table. Pain exploded across Shanice's shoulder and arm as she hit the floor, blood appearing quickly from the small but deep wound. The metallic scent filled the air, sharp and suffocating, mingling with the electric tension that now thrummed between all three of them. Ted's reaction was instantaneous. His eyes widened in disbelief and horror as he processed the chaos, the blood, and the sheer intensity of Nicole's fury. He felt his own anger flare, but it was tangled with guilt, fear, and confusion. For years, he had navigated his relationships carefully, balancing loyalties, personal desires, and the delicate social fabric around him. But this moment obliterated all of that. The consequences of every choice he had made converged at this instant, leaving him paralyzed between action and hesitation. The one person he had failed to anticipate was Nicole in her full, unrestrained wrath, and now the consequences of that oversight were materializing in front of him in brutal, undeniable reality. Shanice lay on the floor, pain searing through her body, not only from the physical impact but from the emotional betrayal radiating from Nicole's eyes. She had never intended to provoke such violence, every step she had taken around Nicole had been measured, cautious, careful. Yet the proximity to Ted, the accidental glance, the innocent laughter, none of it mattered to Nicole's mind, now consumed by jealousy and fury. Shanice felt trapped in a whirlwind of emotions not her own, caught in a storm with no escape, no shelter. Her chest heaved as she tried to process both the physical pain and the psychological terror of being targeted in such a raw, uncontrollable way. Nicole, meanwhile, stood over Shanice, chest heaving, vision blurred by rage and tears that she refused to acknowledge. Her hands shook, not just from the exertion of her attack but from the internal conflict raging within. Part of her recognized the horror of what she had done, a fleeting, guilt-tinged spark in the corner of her consciousness. She knew she had crossed a line, that there were no justifications sufficient to excuse violence, that she had now endangered not only Shanice but herself and Ted. And yet another part of her, the part driven by fear, hurt, and a need for dominance, was exhilarated by the raw power of the moment. The duality tore her apart, each emotion amplifying the other until she felt like a person split in two, one half screaming with anger and the other half frozen in terror at what she had unleashed. Ted tried to intervene, his movements clumsy and hesitant, knowing any sudden motion might provoke Nicole further. He wanted to protect Shanice, to stop the bleeding, to restore some semblance of calm, but he was caught in the tension of a house that had become a battlefield for unchecked emotions. Every second that passed intensified the stakes, every heartbeat threatening to push Nicole beyond any limit he could manage. The moral calculations of what to do collided violently with instinctive reactions to protect those he cared about, leaving him fractured and frozen in the eye of the storm. The house itself seemed to close in around them, walls bearing silent witness to the chaos. Objects toppled, glass threatened to shatter, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood and the scent of panic. The emotional climate was just as oppressive as the physical one. Nicole's internal dialogue, fragmented and contradictory, swung between self-loathing, vindictive satisfaction, fear, and the desperate need to assert control over a reality that had already slipped from her grasp. Each thought pushed her closer to the edge, yet each action deepened her entrapment. She was both victim and perpetrator in a drama that spiraled far beyond her initial grievances. Shanice, struggling to rise, felt the weight of Nicole's fury and the impossibility of reconciling her own innocence with the perception of betrayal in Nicole's mind. Her survival instincts flared, but they were hampered by shock and injury. Every movement was a negotiation with pain and terror, every breath a reminder of vulnerability. She realized that rationality had no place here. Human behavior had been hijacked by emotion, and she was at the mercy of forces she could neither predict nor control. As minutes stretched, each second amplified the psychological torment. Nicole's adrenaline surged while guilt and rational thought fought for control and lost. Ted's own internal conflict deepened, loyalty to Nicole versus responsibility for Shanice's safety, love versus accountability, fear versus action. Every choice seemed doomed to exacerbate the situation, every hesitation a potential disaster. In that moment, the room became a crucible of human emotion, a test of willpower, morality, and self-restraint. The aftermath was inevitable. Shanice's injury would leave a mark, both physical and emotional. Nicole's actions had set in motion consequences that could not be undone, broken trust, strained relationships, and an escalation of conflicts that might consume all three of them. Ted's position as intermediary, protector, and lover was now impossibly complex, forcing him to confront the reality that love alone could not mitigate the chaos unleashed by jealousy and rage. And in that volatile mixture of pain, betrayal, and unrestrained emotion, each of them faced a terrifying revelation: human impulses, when amplified by fear, desire, and insecurity, could shatter everything they held dear, leaving only the stark, raw remnants of what remained. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence after the chaos, broken only by Shanice's shallow, trembling breaths and the faint drip of blood from her wound. Nicole stood frozen, chest heaving, her hands still clenched as the adrenaline ebbed, leaving behind the raw weight of what she had done. The fury that had consumed her was replaced by a gnawing emptiness, a mixture of guilt and disbelief. She had crossed a line that could never be erased, and yet a part of her, the part that had felt the sting of betrayal and imagined humiliation, still whispered that she had been justified, that her rage had been the only truth left she could express. Ted's face was pale, eyes wide with a storm of fear, anger, and confusion. He realized, with a sinking clarity, that nothing could undo the violence Nicole had unleashed, and that the fragile trust he had tried to maintain between all three of them was fractured beyond repair. His loyalty had been pulled in conflicting directions: love for Nicole, compassion for Shanice, the desperate desire to prevent further ruin, and in the end, every instinct he followed had failed to contain the disaster. The room, once a place of everyday life, had become a battlefield where emotions ran unchecked, leaving permanent scars both visible and unseen. Shanice, trembling and hurt, understood with stark clarity that innocence had no shield against jealousy's fury. She had been caught in the collision of desire, suspicion, and insecurity, and while she bore the physical marks of Nicole's wrath, she also carried the psychological weight of betrayal, fear, and disbelief. Even as she struggled to stand, every movement reminded her of vulnerability, every glance a warning that the next moment could bring further harm. In the aftermath, all three were trapped in the consequences of choices they could no longer undo. The house, the relationships, even their own identities were changed forever. Rage, guilt, love, and fear intertwined, creating a tense, volatile web that none of them could untangle alone. One truth became painfully evident: a single spark of jealousy, left unchecked, had the power to ignite chaos that would consume everything in its path. And as they faced the long, uncertain night, each of them realized that survival, physical, emotional, and moral, would demand courage, reckoning, and decisions none were prepared to make. The past could not be undone, the wounds could not be erased, and the fragile equilibrium of trust and loyalty lay in ruins, leaving only the stark, unavoidable reality that some actions, once taken, could never be forgiven.